Hi, I'm the girl with the list, and this is reason 315. I am not having selfish parents out there.
6 questions to ask yourself if you are trying to decide whether to have kids.
I do hate all parents, and I want to start
having more kids if you can't.
People that can't decide.
A lot of discourse about this disabled
Poor
couple.
parents shouldn't be having kids.
Best thing you could do in the
Their form of ethical adoption. No.
Kids, you're selfish.
I'm not the only one who thinks that this is like a lot, right? And when something is a lot, that's when I know that a video essay idea is about to slap me around the face. Once you reach a certain age, your FYP becomes all about parenthood. Should you have kids? Was having kids a mistake? Why don't you have kids? How dare you want kids? Look, this isn't going to be one of those videos where a YouTuber reacts to TikToks and calls it commentary. But these online spaces of self-expression and community seeking and like even anonymous honesty like TikTok or Reddit, dare I suggest, can actually tell us a lot about the modern state of parenting. I mean, as soon as you start scrolling, it becomes apparent that the stakes could not be higher. Morality, purpose, happiness, wealth, an actual human life. So, in this video, I want to dive into the questions that we ask ourselves when we decide whether to have kids and interrogate some of our assumptions about what the answers might look like. TikTok loves a hot take, but what happens when that take is about, creating an entire new person? Let's talk about the ethics of parenting, how we even start to make the choice to have a child in today's world, and whether the internet is the best place to help work it out, or maybe the worst. Part 1. Do you even want kids? The first question, I guess, to decide whether to have kids or not is to ask if you actually, want to have them. And on the surface, this seems pretty simple. But the answer might not be as easy to pin down as it seems. Our wants are often shaped by the society that we live in, and the society that we live in, for the most part, really wants us to have kids. For much of our history, there's been an assumption that everyone who can will have children. Not just that you will have them, but you will want them, you will try for them, you'll plan your life around having them. It will affect who you are in a romantic relationship with, where you live, the timings of your career, what you spend your money on, what your very future looks like. This is what I'm going to call compulsory parenthood. I mean, think about the generations of girls given dolls to play with as a default. Think about the image of American sex-ed classrooms full of bags of flour or eggs as stand-ins for babies, teaching the basics of child rearing for an inevitable point in the future. Think about the doctors refusing treatment that might affect fertility or damage the womb or ovaries because, you might change your mind about wanting to have a baby in the future. Think about the often unspoken path of romantic relationships, from dating to moving in to marriage to children. The questions from family asking, when can we expect to hear the pitter-patter of tiny feet? It is an omnipresent social pressure that is so assumed to be part of our life's path that, to many people, I don't think it feels like a pressure at all. It's just what you do. It's not about if you'll have children, but when and how. To the point where I think that a lot of people, if they were asked why they wanted to have children, wouldn't necessarily have reflected on the question before beyond picking reasons why they are doing something that they were always going to do. The alternative is wanting kids for a different reason and not wanting them at all. This idea of becoming a parent as a factual part of life has clear consequences for our attitudes to child-free people and gives a reason why people might enter parenthood without considering the alternatives in a meaningful way. For those for whom having a child is not innate, there is a degree to which this pathologizes people who do not have children. All people who do not have children, but particularly women, may be viewed as not adults, and is immature, deficient, deviant, selfish, and/or abnormal. Having children is seen as more than a neutral decision. It's the gateway to ultimate fulfillment. It unlocks lifelong access to the nuclear family, the socially acceptable form of family. It gives purpose and shields against loneliness. But for many people, their parents, especially their mothers, friendships and social life were tied into other parents. Their model for adult friendship is tied to access to parenthood in many ways. Familial pressure can be explicit too, not just something learned passively through observation. Last month I made a video about wanting this channel to become more community funded and to sort of expand my Patreon community because of that. And oh boy, did you all show up. But I think one of the most exciting things about it for me is that it gives me a better chance to get you all involved in the creative process. And so for this video in particular, I was really interested in hearing from patrons around their thoughts about parenthood, their experiences as children or as adults, and they really pulled through. So throughout the video, there are going to be a number of anonymized clips from these patrons' testimonials, as well as the more traditional like interviews that I've done in the past in my videos. So I wanted to introduce that before we get into this first one, to give you a little bit of context. And I guess if you want to join the Patreon community, the link will be in the description. Normally I talk about Patreon at the end of the videos, but it has been pointed out to me in the last month, a lot of people didn't know I had one because I didn't talk about them early enough. So that's for you guys.
I also had a very Catholic upbringing, so I ended up arguing with fellow kids at school and teachers and even strangers at work about the fact that I was not going to have kids. Everyone was convinced that I would somehow make a different decision, and now that I'm in my mid-30s, I have never regretted it for a single day.
The phrase compulsory parenthood came to me as I was writing down ideas for this video, but when I went to Google it, assuming that someone had already come up with this phrase, what appeared over and over instead was specifically compulsory motherhood. Articles and blog posts and academic papers use that phrase to talk about reproductive rights or character tropes in movies or religious extremism, but all primarily focused on the assumption that women would be the ones bearing the burden of this. Through much of Western history, the image of a successful woman, a good woman, was a wife and a mother. The ability to produce children was paramount, to provide heirs, to pass on a family legacy, to exhibit a natural inclination for nurturing and care. And I think that marker of success for womanhood is not a relic of history. Many women today feel like their womanhood is tied to their ability to carry a child. If we look at characters in fiction which reflect this kind of social attitude, especially in long-running TV shows, there's this tendency for women who might originally have expressed not wanting children to end up having them by the end of the run anyway. This kind of inevitability that it's only realistic for her to give in, or, maybe because the writers couldn't think of a more interesting storyline for a woman to be given. Gabby from Desperate Housewives is a classic example that's often brought up, and I think the idea of the show itself betrays how baked into normality parenthood is. I mean, it's literally about housewives, the quintessential image of the most normal of the normal, after all. Other characters that people have spoken about who fall into this trap include Bernadette from Big Bang Theory, April from Parks and Rec, Brennan from Bones, Miranda from Sex and the City, Katniss from The Hunger Games, and so many more. People complaining about these characters and plot decisions online ultimately felt frustrated because the decisions seemed to come out of nowhere. I think that in itself reflects the idea that parenthood is the default state that adults should be driving towards. These characters didn't need to go through a long on-screen decision-making process necessarily because their decision to have children is the natural one. They were always going to come to it one way or another. This pervasive social expectation that not just wanting but being able to have children is paramount has been highlighted at length by critics of the Marvel movie Age of Ultron, in which Natasha Romanoff admits that she was sterilized as part of her assassin training as a child. It's efficient, one less thing to worry about, the one thing that might matter more than a mission. It makes everything easier, even killing. You still think you're the only monster on the team? Wild. A wild scene. And speaking of wild, that segue was a joke. If you're about to see the ad read for Wild right now, know that it's Tasman the editor's fault. I wanted to say thank you to today's sponsor, refillable toiletries company Wild, which I've actually been using for years, so I'm going to give these to friends who want to try reducing their single-use plastic consumption. Wild, I know, are mostly known for their deodorant, but they also have body wash, hand wash, and lip balm, all of which are vegan and Leaping Bunny certified. They are reusable cases, so you replace the balm or wash with these little packs like this. They have a range of colours and designs for their cases, including engraved options, which is what I have, and refills can come in over 14 different scents, with many specially for sensitive skin. At the moment, they have a limited edition Paddington case with a marmalade inspired scent deodorant, which I think is adorable. Their deodorant doesn't have any aluminum salts or parabens in it, so they don't work like antiperspirants that block sweat from forming in the glands, instead focusing on moisturizing shea butter and sort of nature-inspired scents to help you feel fresh. And over the years, they've saved an equivalent of £1.6 million of single-use plastic from entering landfill. So if you want to give Wild a try, then you can click the link in my description to learn more about them and use my code HeyRowan to get 20% off all products for a limited time only. Available worldwide. Okay, back to the video. We see child-free people, or those initially who don't want children, associated with a mix of tropes that reflect wider ideas about parenthood. Sometimes they're immature and selfish. Look at Brooklyn Nine-Nine, for example. They use not wanting children as kind of the ultimate climax in main character Jake's character arc of gaining maturity. And this is especially true for populations whose access to proper adulthood is traditionally connected to parenthood. White middle-class people who do not have children are often seen as missing out on a significant aspect of adult development, where parenthood is linked to psychological growth and change. There's also the smug or superior and disconnected child-free woman, described by Camilla Swartz as the shallow narcissist trope. We meet her in 21st century films such as Gone Girl, Amy Dunn, Young Adult, Mavis Gray, and Blue Jasmine, but also in earlier films such as Fatal Attraction, Alex Forrest, and Basic Instinct, Catherine Trammell. She also features prominently in recent series such as The White Lotus, Tanya McCoy Hunt, House of Cards, Claire Underwood, and Succession, Siobhan Shiv Roy. I think it's inevitable that our associations with the type of person who is child-free will affect our feelings about parenthood. You don't want to be a childless person because you don't want to be like them. You don't want to be selfish or embarrassingly immature or a callous, lonely spinster. This underlying idea that having a child is either a sign of being a good and happy person or can help you become one. So, what might happen when we disrupt that image? Let's talk about the child-free movement. Welcome to the rise of the Dink influencer. Double income, no kids. These couples build their brand on living happy, fulfilled lives without children. Far from the pitiful image of the unfulfilled, these people are having the time of their goddamn lives. Dinks both work, neither of them needing to take time off for childbearing or raising. As such, they often maintain a clear trajectory of career progression. They don't have to spend any of that money on small humans under their care. They have the financial, but also the social and practical freedom to travel, to pursue their passions, to never change a dirty diaper in their own home. These creators are doing more than just giving us a traditional image of aspirational luxury or lifestyle that we might think of when it comes to influencers. They are pushing against the false mythology around child-free people that people might well have heard about from family and society their whole lives. And it isn't just dinks, there are also sinks too, single people, especially women, who don't have children either and don't plan to and are happy. The gendered nature of the sink creator is very much because it is women who are most often the target of obligatory parenthood pressure. To see a single woman happy and fulfilled without having to be a mother to get there, without having to be a wife even, I think that's more radical than many of us would want to admit. These conversations around what relationships, families, and futures have to look like have been happening long before dinks came along as a hashtagable niche. In fact, in the UK, less than half of younger millennials, 25 to 34 years old, said they definitely or probably intend to have a child, meaning, by the laws of maths, the majority of us are planning to not have children. It's a decision that those of us in our 30s have had to commit to up until now. So for over a decade of being able to have kids and not, it's not a new decision that we're coming to, right? I think if we're arguing that some people innately or naturally want children, we also have to allow for people to innately and naturally want the opposite. More and more people are admitting that they like the life that they've created without children, that they feel fulfilled as they are, that they aren't interested in changing it to fit parenthood into it. I spoke to my friend Maz, who used to want children, but now has decided to be child-free.
I like my life and I don't really want it to change. You know, I like being able to set my own schedule. You know, I like being able to go at my own pace basically all the time. And I'm a professional freelance artist, and that is an industry that requires me to have a lot of flexibility and be able to like pivot and change on a dime.
So, we've looked at the pressure that might force someone's hand in this decision. We've looked at the rise of people slipping out from under that pressure. But we also obviously need to talk about people who are aware of all of this and still want kids. They're what I'm going to call purposeful parents. People who actively want children, who plan for it or dream of it or dive in with gusto when it happens unexpectedly. In terms of social norms, yes, this is kind of the ideal, but people can fit social norms in their own, okay? That is allowed. And one of them is my friend Connie, who I spoke to a couple of weeks ago about this topic. Connie hasn't always wanted children, but is now in the early stages of planning what life as a parent looks like for her and her boyfriend.
I always had this sense of like, oh, the people who want to have kids, they already know. And they're the people who like played with baby dolls when they were children. They would like have their little plastic dolls in a pram. And I've always been in that mindset that like, oh, those are people that have children. They're the people they know from day one, I'm someone who wants to have a baby. And it wasn't until I would probably say about 3 years ago, because I was approaching 30 and everyone suddenly tells you, oh, your body clock is running out and you need to know like right now if you want to have a baby. And I started thinking about it more and more. And at first I was very much like, I'm not sure I want to because I don't know if I do. And it was probably before I met my boyfriend, I started to have this thought of like, oh, fuck, I think I'm somebody who wants to have a baby. I'm actually really interested in this. And for me, it came from like looking at my life, looking at the things I found fun, the things that excited me. So like movies, TV shows have always been really exciting to me, like books. And I suddenly imagined introducing them to a baby or like rewatching one of my favorite movies with like my grown-up kid, and suddenly it was like the world was in color again. I was like, oh fuck, I think I suddenly have been bonked on the head with like the desire to have a family, to like do Christmases, to like love something, raise it, see it grow up.
Connie's moment of realization and the reasons that she wants children stemming from that, they're not unusual, right? When you ask people why they want children, those who do often have reasons that they can give beyond just, oh, it's just what you do. For some, it's like a bodily, almost biological drive. It comes from an internal feeling. Parents who experience this often, I think, the ones who claim that people who don't want children will definitely change their minds. Their experiences of a natural feeling inside that often appeared when they got older. And so to them, it does often feel like something as inevitable as like the feeling of hunger or a sudden onset of a sex drive in puberty. Like, oh, it will come and then you'll understand and you'll want it too. For others, it's tied to the idea of wanting a child as kind of the ultimate form of love or the ultimate fulfillment or a sense of purpose, or it's an outlet for their drive to nurture or teach or raise. Even their talent for it, that they can't see other obvious ways to enact. And of course, there's the half joking, oh, so someone will look after me when I'm older comment too, which I think is only half joking for some people. I want to point something out here that it's maybe going to upset some people, but look, I know the party line is that these child-free hedonists who only care about themselves are the selfish ones, only thinking about themselves. In fact, some people who decide not to have children are ultimately coming to that based on a deep amount of care and understanding of their capabilities and their own life experiences, maybe even more so than some people who want to have kids.
I decided that I would make sure no other kid had to go through what I did. I even lost a long-term partner for the issue. He was determined to have biological kids, and even though I was very straightforward from the beginning that was not going to be an option, and that I was totally open to raising non-biological kids, adoption or fostering, but according to him, it wouldn't be the same. My current fiance is absolutely on my same page as far as no kids. I've since been able to be sterilized, which was such a massive relief, let me tell you. And I'd still be fine raising kids, but I don't think I could bear it if I watched a kid struggling, my kid struggling, and I knew that some part of it was my fault from passing down those genetics.
Let's be real here. People's reasons to have children are almost always just as about themselves too. They want a sense of purpose. They want a cute mini version of themselves to play with. They want to stuff their womb to get the baby fever to abate. They want to spread the number of good Christian children in the world. I don't know, there's lots of reasons. But more than this, maybe secondary hot take here, I don't actually think that it's a bad or unethical thing to be making this decision selfishly. Having children, I think, has to be a selfish decision to some degree. Like having a selfless martyr as a parent who had you despite not seeing anything in it for themselves feels maybe like it would breed a fucked up kid just as much as someone who was seeking their own selfish happiness as part of the bargain, you know? Selfish doesn't automatically mean immoral. It doesn't stop it from being a right action, but equally, all evidence shows that just the fact of having kids doesn't guarantee to automatically make you happy. And sometimes it's the experience of parenthood which is the cause of that unhappiness. There is a final group who are the most taboo of all that I want to talk about in this section, because even those that consider themselves purposeful parents might not stay that way forever. Regretful parents are a group deemed by many as so immoral, so ungrateful, so unnatural even, that they shouldn't admit to it at all. But I think they are vital to talk about when looking at the question of having children. You have to be prepared for every eventuality after all. And being regretful as a parent is one of them. If parenthood is meant to be focused on your pride and joy, their birth is the happiest day of your life, if it's meant to be natural and a source of boundless unconditional love, then how can someone ever regret it? And not just regret it, but admit to that. What kind of monster looks at their child and doesn't think anything but positive thoughts? Actually, look, it's not as uncommon as you might think. Data is comparatively limited, with researchers in 2021 explaining, although a situation in which a parent regrets having a child can have serious social, emotional, and health-related consequences, researchers, not only psychologists, but also researchers from other branches of the social sciences, have so far failed to explore this issue. As a result, our knowledge about the frequency of regretting parenthood can be derived mainly from the small number of survey studies conducted by non-governmental institutions which provide only limited information. One survey in 2016 in Germany, for example, asked parents to reflect on if they could have their time over again if they would choose not to have children. It turned out that 8% of the German parents in the investigation said that they fully agree with this, and another 11% claimed that they rather agree with this. What distinguished the group of parents who either fully or somewhat agreed with this statement was a belief that being a parent had limited their ability to develop further personally and professionally, and that they had had to sacrifice too much for their families. And I think even responses to anonymous surveys are most likely going to be underreporting this issue. So strong is the social taboo and accompanying feelings of shame and guilt that I think there may well be a lot of people who do feel regret, who don't want to admit to it, even anonymously, even to themselves. So yeah, regretful parents, not some wild outlier group. But for reference, the rate of regret of, say, I don't know, trans people having gone through transition, a problem that many would have you believe is proof of the legitimacy of trans people themselves, that rate is around 1%. There are generally two types of regret when it comes to parents. The first is regretting the experience itself and the effects that it had on the parent's life, whether that was on the marriage, the sense of self, their health, whether physical or mental, their social life, or their career. The second regret is how their children turned out. Now, this includes genuinely immoral actions of adult children, but it might also include prejudiced parents learning that they have queer or trans kids, or even the experience of viewing intergenerational trauma or genetic mental health issues plaguing their child. Because of the taboo nature of the subject, the main place to find honest discussion of this experience, I think, is on Reddit. I've talked before about how I think the anecdotal examples on the site are some of the richest in terms of reliable testimonials of these kinds of experiences, even in comparison to many official studies, and the subreddit Regretful Parents is no exception. They show the range of regretful experiences. One user, for example, posted just this week, "The last 2 years have been the worst of my life. I absolutely love my son, but he's been a hard baby/toddler. Super needy, allergies, eczema, bad sleeper. Has anyone had a really hard start into motherhood/parenthood, but eventually enjoyed it, or at least got out of survival mode?" This is not the image of a callous, unloving parent, but a burnt-out mother who loves her son, but is ground down by the inability to enjoy the practicalities of parenting. Other posts and comments include ones like these. "I, male 23, becoming a father wasn't exactly on my radar. Now, with a 5-year-old son, I'm navigating uncharted territory. He's a typical kid, energetic, curious, but there's a distance between us that I can't quite bridge. I go through the motions, playing games, tucking him in at night, but the connection I see in other fathers eludes me. Every day I hope that maybe I'll wake up feeling that bond I hear other parents talk about. Until then, I keep trying, hoping that one day it'll click." A lot of people don't like their own parents or family. It's the same thing. Yes, you can dislike someone for their personality. Some people also regret having kids because they find they're not as good at it as they'd hoped to be. and they wish they themselves had the emotional tools to give their children a happier life. It's the internal conflict of loving something and feeling the responsibility of something that has negatively impacted your life in a deep way. It is the love combined with resentment that presents significant mental hardship. It's not the lack of love that defines a regretful parent, but mourning of a freedom lost, weighed down with additional responsibility that publicly is not talked about. We saw the reactions spill out into public discourse with everyone's favourite unwitting viral controversy starter, Chapel Roan, making comments about not knowing any happy parents her age, going so far as to say they were in hell. The response was immediate and fierce. Some people were disbelieving. How does she know her friends weren't happy? She's just a miserable childless woman who can't see the magic of parenthood. But others didn't question the validity of her observation, instead criticizing that she had acknowledged it publicly. Comments like, "I'd hate to be her friends," and "she betrayed them." Even though she hadn't named them, she didn't give out details, and these people didn't know if the friends had, explicitly told Roan that she shouldn't talk about it. There was this conclusion reached anyway, that she shouldn't talk about this. We don't talk about this. The very idea of parental regret for many is steeped in so much shame and guilt that you're meant to find this the most wonderful thing in the world, and so regretting it is a source of failure. Failure to be a good parent, a good person, a real woman. It's so intense that it feels like it really is a difference between regretful parents and non-regretful parents. Because there isn't room for any kind of sliding scale there, for any kind of nuance, because to feel even a little bit of regret and admit to it makes you that bad category. And beyond the idea of it being a personal failing, it's also a negative feeling about another person. And not just a random person either, but someone that you're meant to have an innate bond with. This isn't like regretting other interpersonal relationships even, regretting getting married or being friends with someone. Parental regret is on some level a wish that your child or children had never existed. And that is a lot for the parent to deal with, but also for the child. I think a large part of the taboo of regretful parents is this idea that admitting to it, being open and honest, would irreparably harm the child in question emotionally and psychologically, even as an adult. And so the better alternative is to push those feelings down or live with them secretly and never admit to them. But I would question if actually opening up about it as a surprisingly common way of feeling with a range of experiences and degrees of intensity might be exactly what people need. People who are deciding whether to have children, parents who already have them, and yes, if handled well, even children of regretful parents. There's almost no readily available advice on how to navigate this element of a parent-child relationship. No wealth of studies to base it off of, but I think it might depend too much on the individuals involved for there to be a good blanket advice on the topic anyway. One article on the topic, entitled "Yes, Tell Your Kids You Regret Having Them," features the key subtitle, "Chances Are They Already Know." The final person that I did a full-on interview with for this video is my friend Stevie, who has direct personal experience with the US adoption and fostering system as a kid, and Stevie spoke to me about wishing her mother had been more open about her feelings around motherhood and regret.
I mean, I wish my mom would have told me I regretted having you. I don't really like you. You know what I mean? Because fuck, it took me 25 fucking years to figure out that's what was going on. You know? Would have been so much easier.
Yeah, like that honesty, even if it's difficult.
Yeah, because at least maybe I could have had some kind of connection. I could have had some kind of understanding.
We can extrapolate out the feelings that many children of regretful parents might have, but not understand why, from studies focusing on the parents. Since it's been demonstrated by East, Shen, and Barber that regretting parenthood is associated with harsh parenting, in future studies, a deeper analysis of how regretting parenthood influences the development of a child should be conducted. Unwanted childbearing has been found to predict mothers' postpartum depression and parenting stress, mothers' harsh and negligent parenting, and children's behavioural and socio-emotional problems. And for many, especially those on the fence about parenthood, that risk of regretting their decision is enough to decide to not have children. After all, even if levels and frequency of regret amongst non-parents wishing that they had had children is the same as parents wishing the opposite, non-parents' regrets don't, affect anyone else directly. And for a lot of people, that is less of a risk. So I guess at this point in the video, this question of if you should have children, of if it is right, looks like, I guess just decide. But in between the child-free movement as a personal choice and purposeful parenthood as, well, another very personal choice, there's a lot of this messy in between. Nuance, if you will. My favourite word. The label of childless has waned in usage as the more affirmative child-free label has been embraced by non-parents who have chosen to not start a family. But it's also allowed for a separation between those who don't have children as a choice and those who might have been forced to wait to have children or who want children but have struggled to make that a reality. Part 2. Can you have kids? The sad truth is that not everyone who wants children, is ready for them, has really thought about it, can have them. At least not, I guess, what we need to refer to as like biological children. If you've ever known anyone who's struggling with infertility, then you know that reproduction can feel pretty unpredictable and unfair. According to the World Health Organization, research published in 2023, 17.5% of the adult population experience infertility. Fertility can be affected by a myriad of conditions, such as endometriosis, PCOS, fibroids, being in your 40s, being in your 30s, having had an eating disorder, currently having an eating disorder, pelvic inflammatory disease, surgical scarring, cervical mucus problems, premature ovarian syndrome, overactive thyroid, underactive thyroid, having a thyroid, ovulatory disorders, cancer, asthma, just bad luck, side effects from previous cancer treatments, smoking, obesity, previous or ongoing addictions, lupus, arthritis, diabetes, malformation of the uterus, hypertension, low sperm count, mumps, exposure to lead, abnormal sperm, hypergonadism, diminished small. Okay, this isn't the size; it's diminished function of the gonads. So diminished function of the testicles, or diminished, because otherwise it'd be hyper if it was too much. Anyway, so irrelevant what I'm doing. And even if you can conceive, pregnancy, it might be ill-advised for you, right? It puts a huge strain on the body. So if you have a pre-existing condition like arthritis or diabetes, for example, pregnancy has the potential to do some serious and lasting damage. It can also force people to make a choice regarding whether they should continue with medication or treatment that they need that has a potential risk of damaging a fetus, for example. I never want to be pregnant, but I'm also very aware that I'm currently on medication that if I was someone who wanted to be pregnant, I would have to stop taking that medication. But infertility, for whatever reason, is not the automatic end of someone's dreams of parenthood. Fertility treatment does exist. Sperm donation, egg donation, IVF, hormonal treatment, or surrogacy have created new ways to create life. Some people will require fertility assistance for non-medical reasons too, if they want to have children in that way. So think about, queer couples or single people who want to be parents who can't do so in the old-fashioned way, I guess. Fertility assistance, however, is rarely fully accessible. It's expensive and in some places even illegal.
I think even saying that I emphatically don't want kids is a little bit wrong. But the fact that for me, having children will be an active decision that I would have to proactively make and put a lot of money behind, like never mind even just like finding a donor. Like I have PCOS. It is likely that fertility will be complex for me. Also, I'm a fat Black person, like navigating, prenatal care becomes infinitely more complex. The risks for me are higher. I have like gender dysphoria to think about. So it's all the stuff that's more complex where I'm like, you know what? Going down that road with the thousands of pounds it would probably cost, the emotional toll that it would take, and then it would throw my entire life up into the air. And I would have to, reshape who I am as a person. Like you're not the same person before or after you have a kid. And so with all of that, and no, I'd rather be child-free.
Many of these treatments are pretty new, and we as a society haven't come to a consensus on how to ensure that it's all practiced ethically. Surrogacy, for example, can be, a wonderful choice for some people, but is also ripe for exploitation. Sperm and egg donation can create new families, but donor-conceived children might feel a sense of loss around the anonymity of their biological parent. Tyler Levi Sniff, a man who didn't learn he was donor-conceived until he was in his 30s, told The Atlantic that it was so important to me to know my bio-father's life story, his personality and talents and struggles. In the UK, it was only this year, for example, that we recognised donor-conceived children's right to know and abolished donor anonymity. There are economic and political restrictions over who can access which treatments and how easily. In the UK, until very recently, lesbian couples needed to pay out of pocket for fertility assistance that heterosexual couples got for free on the NHS. A 2018 article from the BBC reported that the NHS denied IVF treatments to women over the age of 34, despite the recommended age cutoff for treatment being 42. And if you're incarcerated, you have very little chance of conceiving or raising a child. Very few prisons allow conjugal visits, and assisted reproduction is not allowed. I can only find one example in Australia of an incarcerated woman requesting IVF and having it approved. The tabloids obviously had a field day. It's one of those stories that right-wing trashy magazines love. A bad poor person wants government assistance to be a bad parent kind of headline. But does the government have the right to deny incarcerated people the right to a family? Does anyone truly have the right to reproduce? Is fertility treatment healthcare or a luxury? When we consider how Black people are disproportionately incarcerated, especially in the United States, denying prisoners the ability to have children, to raise them, to care for a family, it all starts to feel significant in some ways, shall we say. Diana Block of the California Coalition for Women Prisoners has said, when you take many thousands upon thousands of women of colour, Black women of reproductive age, and you put them in prison during that period of their reproductive age, and then you slowly kill them due to the problems of inadequate healthcare, then that's also a eugenics program. And despite what many people might assume, your nationality, race, and income still heavily affect your likelihood of both you and your fetus surviving pregnancy, childbirth, and the postpartum period. A 2021 report from the National Vital Statistics System reported that in the US, Black women face a maternity mortality of 69.9 deaths for every 100,000 births. For white women, that number is 26.6. Meaning that Black women were more than twice as likely to die as white women were. Reproductive health is public health. It's shaped by policy, perhaps in many cases even more than it's shaped by biology. Now, at some point in this talk of infertility and dangerous pregnancies, some of you might have said to yourselves, well, why not just foster or adopt? There are so many kids that need homes. Why not take care of them? This, I think, is the automatic response. If I can have my own kids, I'd just adopt. And I think it's said with the intention of validating that parenting decision, right? Like, oh, I'd love a child either way. But I also think it can betray a sort of every child is the same in my eyes kind of rose-tinted view that can leave people who foster or adopt unprepared for the specific experience of parenting a fostered or adopted child. To begin with, just the process of adoption and fostering is very different from the process of having a biological child. Like, it seems obvious, but it is true. In the UK, for example, you have to go through an approval process that includes background checks and training courses in order to foster, something that biological parents don't have to do. There's also the basic fact that you're taking in a child with a pre-existing relationship with another parent. Even if a child is separated from their biological parents at birth, those parents don't just disappear. You're going to have to reconcile a shared parenthood with two people who you don't necessarily know. With foster care, most of the time, reunification is the goal, and it's not uncommon for adoptees to attempt to reconnect with their birth parents. Even if these child's biological parents have died, that is still an existing relationship, an existing trauma that might well go against your pre-existing mantra of, like, this is my child, and your vision of what that relationship will look like. It's something that I talked to Stevie about at length during our interview, not just because of her experiences within the American system, but also as someone who's investigated the UK alternative with her wife as a potential carer or parent herself.
Because I was in the foster system in the US and I am like a survivor of child abuse and all of that stuff, that has radicalized me in one direction. But since moving to the UK, and I had a period of time where me and my wife were going through like the adoption process where you are trained to be good enough to become an adopter. It just completely broke my brain and radicalized me in a completely different way. But at the same time, I don't really want to speak over the voices of people in the UK who have been harmed by how the system is set up or how it used to be set up or whatever. But oh my God, it's night and day as far as just rights. Just adoptees have rights in most countries except for the US. A big part of the breaking my brain thing isn't necessarily that it that part is radicalization as much as Holy shit, they're putting adoptive parents, like intended adoptive parents, through a 6-month training course where they have organized everything that I think and believe and made it mandatory for them to believe it before they're allowed to adopt a child. What? Like what? You have to agree that adoption is trauma before you adopt a child in the UK. That would be so incredibly mind-blowing to most people in the US, I would say, to think that that is just taken as a fact here. It's not like saving a child. It's not, oh, like I am doing a duty of loving them and helping them because, I don't know, their parents suck or whatever. It's literally like, no, adoption itself is the trauma. Like, what? So cool.
Foster care, while currently sort of necessary in some cases, often ends up doing more harm than good in the current system. Not every child placed in foster care needs to be separated from their parents, and not every child placed in foster care is provided with a safe family. In an article for USA Today, Kayla McKinnon writes of the foster care experience in New York. Many of these children are put in what are known as congregate facilities. Children, myself included, who are housed in congregate facilities face isolating prison-like conditions that include severe limitations on privacy and bathroom use, poor food quality, and inadequate medical care, particularly mental health care, all while feeling lonely, unsafe, and unloved. Foster children are disproportionately less likely to graduate from high school, which is unsurprising considering how foster care disrupts schooling. They're also more likely to experience poverty. They're significantly more likely to be incarcerated at some point in their lives as well. In fact, the likelihood of foster children to become convicted of a crime is so high that there is a term for it, the foster care to prison pipeline. And it's tempting to think like, oh, these kids, they're probably screwed anyway, right? Their biological parents were neglectful, and even though the system failed, it's better than nothing, right? Well, not necessarily. One 2006 study, for example, the impact of foster care on development, compared 3 groups of children. Children who experienced foster care, those who were maltreated but remained in the home, and children who had not experienced foster care or maltreatment despite their similarly at-risk demographic characteristics. The children who went through foster care had higher levels of internalizing problems than the children who stayed with their families, despite experiencing similar levels of maltreatment. A 2007 study, Child Protection and Child Outcomes, measuring the effects of foster care, reached a similar conclusion. Children on the margin of placement tend to have better outcomes when they remain at home, especially older children. For people considering parenthood, becoming foster carers is often seen as a universally positive, generous, morally pure way of getting to care for a child. But the understanding of these children as traumatized, not necessarily from their own families, but the foster system itself, is often not part of that idealized picture. And it absolutely should be. Are you prepared to deal with the realities of that trauma? Are you entering into ethical forms of fostering and adoption? Are you putting the child first, even if it means admitting that you aren't good enough to do this? And if you can't do that for this hypothetical child, how can you say that you'd be able to do it for your own biological children if they needed you in the same way? Especially when we look at the many factors that might cause young people to experience hardship. Part 3. Should you have kids? The Office of National Statistics reported last year that the number of babies born in England and Wales is now the lowest since the 1970s. A lot of headlines have been written about this. A lot of older journalists wringing their hands. What is happening to these youths? Are they not horny enough? They have so much porn at their fingertips nowadays, goddammit. For many people, the question of why fewer young adults are having kids becomes somewhat laughable. As you know, you gesture around the empty bank accounts, unstable rental arrangements, climate crisis, World War III news cycle dumpster fire outside the window, like, hello, this is why. But for the purposes of a thorough investigation, let's break it down a little, shall we? After all, it might seem like common sense, but do the studies agree? Does the evidence back up the obvious? To begin, there's the economy. The old cosy lives, as we say in the UK. The cost of living crisis. The stats are not great, everyone. Sometimes those stats are official government findings, and sometimes it's companies with a real vested interest in understanding the financial situation of the general public. Like Royal London, the UK's largest mutual pensions, protections and investment provider, which published a financial resilience report in 2024, looking at changes in average household bills in the UK. And they found 1 in 10% people suggested that cost of living concerns had directly impacted their family planning, with people suggesting they will either delay having children, have fewer children than they planned, or even abandon their plans for children altogether. This figure rises to more than 1 in 5, 22%, of those aged 18 to 34. So yeah, that's pretty damning. It's not just that potential parents are feeling the squeeze in their own lives. They may well be seeing the impact on their peers around them who are already having children, adding that potential future image to their own decision making. More than a quarter, 27% of parents with young children under 3, are finding themselves overdrawn regularly or occasionally, with 1 in 10, 9%, needing to borrow money to cover monthly expenses. This was part of Maz's considerations too.
I was working part-time for a charity, which gave me a fairly steady, reliable income that I just don't have anymore. And so now, if I have a lean month or I'm stupid with my money, as I frequently am, I can adapt. But the stakes get a lot higher when that comes with responsibility for another human being who can't fend for themselves.
To me, this feels like a clear example of people who decide not to have children being far from the selfish, egotistical figures that they're often painted as. Maz's decision is about what's best for them, but it's also with a real and considered understanding of the impact that their personal situation would have on a child, as well as themselves. That's not to say that this is a black and white issue. I think a road where we start to assign worthiness to parents based on their income is a dark one. Even if you subscribe to that point of view, from a practical sense, it just doesn't work. When now more than ever we know that for all but the wealthiest of inherited income trust fund havers, your income can disappear in a flash. Redundancies seem ever more common, and people who felt secure a couple of years ago now fear AI making their work obsolete. Just because someone passes the finance test when they fall pregnant doesn't mean that they still will by the time the baby is born even. If we see people struggling to afford to have children, the question seems like it should be, how do we financially support these families and ensure that all children are provided for, rather than to turn the power of policy onto removing the ability or even the legal rights of people from having or keeping these children. Even those with a steady, magical, future-proof income which can pay for anything dear baby could possibly want might still look at the state of the world and give pause. Yes, it's time to talk about the climate crisis, everyone. Oh god. Now this does seem to already be having an impact. 39% of the 10,000 young people aged 16 to 25 who were surveyed around the world by researchers at the University of Bath in 2021 said that they were hesitant to have children in light of the climate crisis, and what they saw as a failure to combat this issue by leaders. Environmentalism as a consideration seems to be growing. In 2021, that same year, a Pew Research Center survey found that of Americans aged 18 to 49 who didn't plan to have kids, only around 5% cited climate or the environment as a major factor in their decision. Whereas by 2024, just 3 years later, that had risen to 26%. When it comes to the decision to have children, I think there are 2 reasons why parents might be hesitant around the environment. One is the worry of the type of world that their child will be living in, and the other is that their child might worsen the crisis itself. Now, for people my age especially, that second one is probably fueled, at least in part, by the spectre of the overpopulation problem. We had it a lot growing up. This boogeyman of a booming global population that would destroy the earth and consume its resources like a black and brown swarm of locusts. It was fucking racism the whole time. It is no coincidence that conversations around overpopulation were often focused on non-Western countries, emboldened by racist stereotypes and Orientalist fearmongering. White people too often blame black and brown women for having children when the issue isn't population, it is consumption. Consumption is what's linked to environmental destruction. The conversation should be about capitalism and climate change, not about controlling the bodies of people who give birth. I could do a whole video on this, but I guess Google ecofascism if you're interested.
Harder opinion to deal with was that there was an inherent wrongness for someone to have so many children, and that it must mean that at least some of us were neglected. And in more recent years, I've had to hear the conversation around large families being about the increased carbon footprint. While there's some truth to that, it still does not compare to the major factors contributing to climate change, and my little sibling's existence is not the problem here.
Okay, but here's where looking at the stats can get interesting. The UK's First Generations and Gender Survey in 2022 found that although millennials with strong environmental concerns were less likely to intend to have kids, The reverse was actually true for Gen Z. This may be because some younger people do not intend to have children for other reasons. Or it could be that Gen Zers who would like to have children are more worried about the planet that their children will inherit. And yes, both good theories. But while reading another piece on the environmental impact on potential parents, I also found this quote from Jade Sasser, the author of Climate Anxiety and the Kid Question. What Gen Z tends to know, more so than other generations, is that population growth doesn't cause climate change. The consumption of resources, production of oil and gas, cutting down of forests, these things cause climate change, and they are not necessarily driven by human numbers. They're driven by politics, policies, and inequitable consumption patterns in the world. So maybe we move on to the final bit of like all of this hellfire that might kind of feed into trends on child rearing, and that is the global political situation, the descent into fascism, as it were. For many people, they are questioning if they even want to bring a child into the world as it is right now. Now, some people would counter that argument by saying, you know, there have been many people across history who have been in much worse political situations than you, and they still had children. Yes, this is true, but like, you've heard of baby boomers, right? Political conditions and the general public's experience of them have always had some kind of effect on the decision to have children, including the rise in political and economic optimism in the post-war period that gave rise to boomers. The everyday political and practical reality of men being home for good rather than just for shore leave, the relative certainty that your child would grow up with both their parents, that is all part of that booming generation. So is that surprise that a pessimistic political climate might have the opposite effect? Especially when many people around the world have greater access to contraceptives, abortion, and other methods of autonomy over their reproductive capabilities. Because I don't doubt that many women through history whose entire worth was in their ability to bear healthy sons, who didn't have any access to reliable methods to stop pregnancy, who were told that sex with their husband was their duty, many of them, given the choice, would have chosen not to have children either. Indeed, for many Americans at the moment, part of their hesitation to have children is the fear of bringing a child into a country that might have rolled back their reproductive rights by the time that those children are able to have children themselves. And part of the political climate of the US right now in particular is in fact directly tied to reproduction beyond the sort of ever-present abortion debate. And that is in the rise of pronatalism. A loose definition of this would describe it as the belief that having children is good. But the current iteration of it is specifically tied to the idea that it is good for the state, for the nation, for sometimes a particular race. In this way, pronatalism is tying together explicitly the personal choice of parenthood and public policy, lawmaking, or governmental incentives. Historically in the US, it's been linked to sort of right-wing Christian fundamentalism, growing the family, being fruitful like an edict from God. But in the last 100 years, we'd seen it as a political tool outside of religious tradition as well, as women gained increasing rights to vote and to work. There was this anxiety that white, native-born, middle-class women were having smaller families. Now, this made these women less controllable, but it also heralded the boogeyman of the fertile woman of colour, particularly Black or Mexican women in the US, who might contribute to a displacing of the white race of America. And then more and more we see the Musks of the world, far from a sort of religious traditionalist, support these ideas too, with him boldly proclaiming on the Hell site X, instead of teaching fear of pregnancy, we should teach fear of childlessness. And from before this most recent election, Vance, the now Vice President of the United States, was clear about his own views on the subject. He said, "We want more babies because children are good, and we believe children are good because we are not sociopaths." Alongside other claims, that people without children have no direct stake in the country's future, and therefore their votes should count less. He said childless leaders disturb him, and concurred with a podcast host who said postmenopausal women's only role in society is to be grandmothers. He's also a strong supporter of the oil and gas industry and has been dismissive of concerns about climate change. This investment in citizens having more children, but also directly working to make life worse for those citizens, is indicative of the same rhetoric that has anti-abortion activists also stand up against social benefits and welfare for young people. Through pronatalism, we can see the social expectation turned into political policy. But again, just because a personal decision aligns with a messed up political policy, it doesn't mean that it's inherently wrong. I titled this section, "Should You Have Children?" And the first part of it has really put the emphasis on the should. But now, I want to put it on the you. Should you have children? It's a question that many people online claim to be authorities on in comment sections based on like the person they're talking about's views or behavior, but also based on wider ideas of whole groups of people, queer and trans people, mentally ill people, and disabled people, to name just a few. Should those people have children? Probably the biggest viral moment in this arena was the pearl clutching around 2 disabled adults having a child earlier this year. Antoine and Deja announced their pregnancy not to the usual congratulations and well wishes, but a torrent of abuse and disbelief online. These 2 TikTok influencers were inundated with comments, response videos, and commentary about how they were terrible people who were selfishly condemning a baby to a life of obvious neglect. How could 2 disabled people who need help themselves be real parents? It occurred to me as I read messages from these comments that so many of the arguments that people were making about why this shouldn't have happened were not just about ableism, but also based on strict ideas about what real parenthood was. She can't even hold her baby properly, one person said, as if that is a requirement of parenthood. I mean, like, is it? Oh God. Okay, well, I guess I'm one of those YouTubers. I got halfway through a video essay and only now am I going, what is the definition of parenthood? Is it to create a new human biologically related to you? I mean, I think we all understand that parents and children don't have to be biologically related, and that some people wouldn't consider their biological parents to be their real parents either, so okay, so there's something else going on here. Is it to raise a child? To raise them as your own? But what does that mean? Like, is it to provide shelter, food, and clothing? But does breaking it down to financial resources make sense? Because if you do that, then, I mean, like, a company could be a parent as long as they donated enough stuff to a kid. Is it to guide them? To usher them into adulthood? To teach them about the world? To love them? But, like, a lot of people love children in their families or in their friendship groups without being their parent. Teachers might teach them more than a parent. Godparents might take on their spiritual learning. Military boot camp for tough teens might guide them technically. But would we say that those are parents? Probably not. I think a lot of parents feel like offended, honestly, if you were to suggest that anyone but them was the child's parent, even if they all had a hand in doing these like parental roles. And sometimes it isn't even the parents that are doing these things the most. Some parents like send their children to boarding school and barely see them, but they would still consider themselves to be the sole parents of that child. So maybe it's about being like the primary decision maker in that child's life, the final authority on things like medical care or where they live or how they're raised. Maybe we should just give up and ask the dictionary what it is. Oh, the fucking dictionary did us dirty on this one as well. A mother or father of a person or an animal, or someone who looks after a person in the same way as a parent does. A parent is a parent who parents, I guess, in a parental way. What is that way, dictionary? Another one of my patrons who offered their perspective found themselves forced into the role of parent in many ways as a sibling.
The problem with having 7 children and both parents working full-time jobs and not hiring help was that there was more parenting to do than there were parents. I started being left in charge when I was 11. I would be babysitting my siblings, who are a wide range of ages and needs, typically after school until one of my parents got home from work, or on certain weekend days and days off school. And none of it was paid. I had to grow up really fast to take on that level of responsibility. I would be lying if I said I do not feel any resentment to my parents for that. It wasn't just babysitting. My younger siblings began calling me second mom, and we would all laugh it off as a joke, but it wasn't really. I was held responsible for their actions a lot of the time, responsible if they got hurt, and I began to see them more akin to people I was raising rather than people I was being raised beside.
But clearly this person didn't see themselves as a parent to their siblings, despite taking on this role, and they also didn't want to be one, and their parents wouldn't necessarily have said that they were the parent, like they would have said they were the sibling, even if they were enacting these parental duties. You know what does big government say? Well, they sort of define the state of being a mother, and most times a father, as being in a position of parental responsibility. According to the UK government website, if you have parental responsibility, your most important roles are to provide a home for the child, protect and maintain the child. You are also responsible for disciplining the child, choosing and providing for the child's education, agreeing to the child's medical treatment, naming the child and agreeing to any change of name, looking after the child's property. Which is interesting, right? Because there's nothing about emotionally nurturing there. There's nothing like that. You don't have to teach them, just choose their education. You don't have to nurse them, just agree for them to be nursed. You're responsible for disciplining them before you're required to love them, according to these guidelines. You don't even really have to see them. In the section on separated parents on the website, for example, it says, if you have parental responsibility for a child, but you do not live with them, it does not mean you have the right to spend time with your children. However, the other parent must include you when making important decisions about their lives. So some parents aren't responsible for providing a child's home, shelter even. And then there are foster parents. If you become a foster parent, you'll need to care for the child as part of a team. This could include a local authority, schools, health professionals, and the child's birth family. Keep records and write reports about the foster child. Attend meetings and advocate for the child. Help the child manage their behaviour and feelings. Attend training. Okay, so according to the government's parenting resources, foster carers are required to advocate for the child, to help them manage their feelings, to keep records. But those aren't things required as part of parental responsibility, at least not that are seen as important enough to make it onto the online list. And there are also instances where people other than parents can make these kinds of decisions. Special guardians, for example, are people who take in children when they cannot live with their birth parents and adoption is not right for them. You'll make all day-to-day decisions about the child, for example, schooling and medical treatment. You do not have to discuss these decisions with the birth parents. You'll need to get the consent of everyone who has parental responsibility for the child before you make some important decisions. So it isn't clear-cut. What a parent is has many definitions dependent on what people's own upbringing has told them about parenting. And don't even get me started on trying to define a good parent. But I think we'd like to think of it as simple, that it's obvious. And it's why I think people are so intense and outraged over Antoine and Deja being parents, because to them, being able to do certain things, like pick up your baby with your own two arms and like rock them in your arms as you pace about a room, like that image, that is what parenting is. And so people doing parenting in different ways feels like neglectful even to some people. And so in the example of Antoine and Deja, we see not just the impact of ableism in public discourse, but also this assumption of parenting as a wholly individualistic and isolated experience. The parents need to be able to do everything themselves with no outside help or they are failing. When we look at the needs of a child, the different things that might go into being responsible for them, it becomes clear to me that maybe not having these things be the responsibility of one or two individuals is probably better for everyone involved. And this idea was brought up by all three of my friends during our chats. Before I'd gotten that far into my list of topics to talk about even, like they all brought it up. Connie as part of her future parenting plans and Maz and Stevie as child-free people who strongly believe in a kind of joint communal responsibility to care for children.
Now I know I want to have kids. I ask everyone, I'm like, will you be there for me when I have a baby? Like, will you be in my life? Will you like actively help? And I can do the same for you. Because I think a lot of these women, and the reason so many women are turned to kind of mummy vlogging is because they're fucking lonely and it's really hard work raising a kid and you need support. You need people who are going to watch the baby so you can have a fucking nap. It's all well and good being like husbands, but I think you also need community. I mean, some of these husbands need to get off their fucking ass as well. But you do need community. You need like you need a village. It's the truth. And I think people have really forgotten that. And when I see these mummy vloggers all supporting each other in the comments, I'm like, this is what they're doing. This is what they're hungry for. They're trying to get that sense of community, that sense of help and support that maybe they're not getting in their immediate circles. So I think the only thing I would ever be really worried about is if I had a baby and I suddenly found myself so lonely and I found that I hadn't really established the support network yet, or I discovered that people were not going to be there for me and didn't want to have anything to do with me once I had a kid. Those are the things that I think they scare me, and they're the things that I would worry about the most if I had a child. I really think everyone gets so obsessive about like how there's a correct way to have a child, a correct way to raise a child. You have to feel a certain way about it. It has to look like this. And I really do not subscribe to that.
Children are a particularly vulnerable group for a whole number of reasons: practical, psychological, and financial. And people don't just become islands when they reach adulthood, when they hit 18. In fact, 18-year-olds transitioning out of childhood, particularly when that transition is hard because of like coming out of foster care or losing family financial support, like they are some of the most vulnerable people by age. A village isn't just for helping children, I don't think.
I just very much reject this idea that children belong to parents, or that they can belong to anyone but themselves. You know, the whole it takes a village thing. I think that parents are usually primarily responsible for guiding a new being through growing up until they can be responsible for themselves. So I wouldn't necessarily say that there is a hard line between parent of a child and someone else of a child, if that makes sense. I think that the entire world is responsible for the children, especially for queer people. We are our own parents. Like, we've had to reparent ourselves. You know, we all have inner children inside of us. I think that, like, literally everyone on earth is a child because you carry your childhood with you. So that's why I think that that's why I feel so strongly in the belief that everyone is responsible for children because they grow up, and that's who we create our community with.
Amaz talked to me about the practical barriers of enacting this philosophy in modern Britain.
We both grew up like in fairly rural villages in Nigeria, right? And within that, there was this real sense that children are everyone's responsibility. That meant that, like, you know, kids, I mean, my maternal grandmother, I think, had like 14 kids. She wasn't caring for all of them all the time. Children would come and go from people's houses. There would be these like multi-generational families within a single compound. You know, every adult was responsible for every child.
Mm-hmm.
And your parents were like the primary authority. Like, they got the say on a lot of big things. But for example, I mean, remember, like, my dad told me about how, like, when he was a kid, if him and his friends were out misbehaving, it could be some adult that they did not even know, but it'd be, okay, who is your father? I'm taking you to see him right now because you're up to some fuckery. And so for me, it's like, I do see children as a collective responsibility, and part of the reason why I am so happy to see children out in public doing kid things in public is that it's like, yes, no, children are a part of our community, and in the same way that, like, I don't expect my partner to meet all of my needs, you know, I think it's unreasonable to expect, you know, even like one person or even two people, even including grandparents, up to, you know, 4 or 6 people, like, they aren't all, that's not enough to care for kids. It just is. And so for me, like, when I was constructing my little, like, parenting castle in the sky, I imagined having, you know, an array of friends and family and loved ones and stuff and we'd like come and go from each other's homes, like we'd like look after each other's kids all the time, and there would be that like real village happening. I think that the nature of British life, society, culture makes that really difficult.
It might not be how they grow up, but this idea of a village rallying to take care of a child is an ideal that many new parents today and those around them are excited to make work. Admitting that you can't do it alone is seen in many circles as like healthy and understandable as an admission. But for other people, admitting this is not a positive step to creating a wholesome and healthy child. It's instead an admission of incompetence, of failure, which needs to be investigated. And so we come to today's final question. Part 4. Who gets to decide if you're worthy of parenthood? At the start of this video, the questions were around how you make a choice to have kids or not. But that question is meaningless for a lot of people because that choice doesn't exist. Not for everyone. What? A sort of twist 3/4 of the way through a video essay that's heavily hinted at and referenced on the way? Surely not a Rowan Ellis video, because the discourse around whether choosing to have kids is the right choice, or the moral choice, or the ethical choice. Like, in that discourse, we often leave out the fact that for many people, that choice does not exist in a free and meaningful way. Let's begin just on an individual level. Reproductive coercion. It's shockingly common in intimate romantic relationships. A 2022 article from the BBC cited a survey that found that of 1,000 women aged 18 to 44 in the UK, 50% said they had experienced at least one type of reproductive coercion. The most common form of reproductive coercion is pressuring a partner to have sex without protection. But it might also include being pressured or threatened into having an abortion, hiding or withdrawing birth control, damaging birth control, or knowingly lying about your ability to have children. But it isn't just these individual abusive experiences of relationships that take away people's choice. Across much of our history, and still to this day, parenthood has been forced upon or denied to almost all marginalised communities in one way or another. We force parenthood through lack of access to sex education, abortion, and birth control, without access to the education and resources to make fully informed decisions about reproductive care. Some people, young people especially, are going to become pregnant and give birth whether they want to or not. But beyond the biology of carrying a child, the ongoing relationship of parenthood, the act of getting to parent, has also been forcibly denied. When I talked about infertility earlier, I left out a cause of infertility which is entirely man-made: forced sterilisation. While significantly less common than it was in the 20th century, medically inducing infertility against the will of the individual still happens. Buck v. Bell has never explicitly been overturned in the US, for example. In most states, someone deemed mentally incompetent can be sterilised without their express consent. Birth control, hysterectomies, they can be necessary treatments for menstrual pain or mental health, and I think we can easily see how it can be in someone's best interest and improve someone's overall quality of life. But there are people categorized as mentally unfit who actively vocalize their desire to have children, and they still don't get to make choices about their reproductive health. Whilst under her conservatorship, for example, Britney Spears wanted to get her IUD removed, but her guardians wouldn't let her. "I want to be able to get married and have a baby," Miss Spears said. "I was told right now in the conservatorship I'm not able to get married or have a baby." She told the court that she wanted to remove the birth control device so I could start trying to have another baby, but this so-called team won't let me go to the doctor to take it out because they don't want me to have children, any more children. There are some very recent cases where an incarcerated person who wasn't deemed mentally incompetent was still sterilised against their will. Between 1997 and 2013, nearly 1,400 incarcerated women were sterilised in California alone. One of them was Kelly Dillon, who in 2021 underwent surgery that she thought was to remove a cyst. A hysterectomy was performed instead without her knowledge or consent. A particularly shocking case of reproductive abuse occurred this year, only a few weeks ago in fact, with the story of Adriana Smith. Adriana was only 8 weeks pregnant when she experienced blood clotting in her brain, a stroke. She subsequently became brain dead. To be clear, she died. There was no chance of her ever waking up. The machines giving her life support were enacting her bodily functions, nothing more. In any other circumstance, her family would be brought in to say goodbye, and after a few days at the most, the machines would be switched off and they would begin to mourn her tragic loss. Instead, the hospital, in compliance with Georgia laws that prevent abortion after 6 weeks, told the parents that they were going to keep Smith in a vegetative state so that the fetus could continue to develop. April Newkirk, Smith's mother, said in an interview with ABC, "We want the baby, that's part of our daughter, but the decision should have been left to us, not the state." Adriana Smith was no longer able to communicate or advocate for herself. Her family, the people who would normally be able to step up and advocate on her behalf, were silenced, and the law enforced a medical decision that did not prioritize her dignity in life or death. I think it is the most stark modern example of this hypocrisy of pro-life laws, and betrays the dehumanization forced on Black women in America every day. The baby was cut out of Adriana on the 13th of June, weighing under 2 pounds, and the family had to start a GoFundMe to cover her medical expenses. And the sad truth is, these choices don't stop being taken away once a child is born. The question is not just who can have a child, but who is allowed to keep them. The state has the ability to deem you an unfit parent, but what makes you an unfit parent, well, that's often been overtly political. Black families in America, for example, are disproportionately targeted by CPS. Last year, a woman, Tamisha Jackson, took medical advice regarding the care of an infant from a licensed midwife. But it wasn't the same advice from her doctor, and the doctor, concerned about the baby's welfare, reported her to CPS, and days after giving birth, Jackson was separated from her child for following care instructions from a licensed midwife, who she trusted as a woman who was pregnant. One couple, Bianca Claiborne and Deontay Williams, were on their way to a funeral with their children. They were stopped by a trooper who searched their car and found less than 5 grams of marijuana in their possession. This was classified as a misdemeanor offense where they lived, and was usually dealt with simply by issuing a citation. Instead, they were forcibly separated from their children, and it took them 6 weeks to be able to regain custody again. A month and a half separated from their young children, including a breastfeeding baby. An unbelievably traumatic event for everyone involved. Even after they were returned, the kids have displayed signs of trauma. The couple's now 6-year-old son begs his mother, "Please don't let them come back and take us." He experiences nightmares and wets the bed. Another child has a visceral reaction to seeing police. And these are not outlier incidents. As The Guardian reports, in the course of their lifetimes, more than half of black children, 53%, will face an investigation by child welfare services before they turn 18. In 2018, black children were overrepresented in foster care, accounting for 23% of kids in the system, but only comprising 14% of all US children. Poverty can also essentially be cited as a reason to separate a parent from a child. Failure to meet material needs of a child, regardless of the reason why the parent is failing to meet those needs. It can be classified as neglect, because being poor isn't a crime except when it is. And the system at the moment is set up to punish rather than help, to spend resources on removing children from these homes rather than supporting the families, to pay foster carers rather than investing that money in allowing families to stay together. Another area where the utter lack of empathy in policies can affect parents and children alike is clear when we look at the ongoing ICE raids, detainments and deportations. One of the many articles and news reports from this year include one entitled, "A father of 5 was detained by ICE on his way to work. Now his family is losing their home." This simple sentence ultimately says it all. Not just the injustice and trauma of forced separation with no hope of reunification, but also the practical and financial burdens that these state-sanctioned destructions of families can have. Earlier this year, the Young Center for Immigrant Children's Rights included in a statement that in 2017 and 2018, we witnessed firsthand the immediate and significant trauma these children experienced when they were forcibly and unlawfully taken from their parents. They endured separations lasting months or years. To this day, some children have still not been reunited with their parents. So when we ask these questions, like, should I have a child? Is it ethical to have a child? Do I really want to be a parent? We might think that we're asking a purely individual question. But often, the most deeply personal issues are also the most connected to wider questions of social justice and the potential for how things could and should be for everyone. The biggest part of the conversation, which is often put to the side in this entire discussion, is ironically children themselves, one of the most vulnerable groups in our society, experiencing ultimately a sense of powerlessness that we normally associate with intense marginalization, a lack of agency, of freedom, of respect, asked what they want only to be told what's best for them anyway. Children are their own people, but a lot of dreams parents have about their children are based on a projected vision of who they want their children to be. Many parents, if they really examine their own feelings and reactions, would have to acknowledge a kind of unspoken, egotistical, possessive or controlling element to their parenthood, even from before a child is born. We've all seen the obvious disappointment at gender reveal parties as a parent who clearly imagined or wanted a boy finds out it's a girl instead. This is something one of my patrons spoke about in their own relationship with their parents. Even though they knew their parents loved them, they still didn't feel like they genuinely saw or understood them in any real sense.
My relationship with my parents should be an A+ because they got me diagnosed, got me the funding from the government, got me into therapy and other mental health services since I was young. Genuinely overall not bad people and loved me. I'm 100% glad for that and love my parents. I still feel scared letting my parents know I am who I am as a person, maybe not because of the threat of them hurting me or kicking me out, because that's unlikely, but in fear of them saying that's not who I am and that they know me better than I know myself.
And the more we break down these ideas at the start of the video of compulsory parenthood, the more we start to deconstruct the assumptions and romanticizations of parenting that can lead more to a disconnect than a closeness with your actual children. Children who might not match up to your simplistic and mythologized ideas of the ultimate fulfillment in life and an utterly unconditional love and the best thing that's ever happened to you. And that process will also potentially let us expand our ideas around supporting and taking care of children as less of a possessive and isolated experience and more of a holistic communal web where we all might care in our own way about everyone's futures. In an age where we increasingly understand our personal choices on a global political scale, it's easy to get lost in the discourse. Should you have kids? Why are you asking me? I don't know you. But I guess the one thing I do know from the whole process of making this video, now more than ever, is that we have to fight for it to really be a choice that everyone has the ability and freedom to make. Thank you so much for watching. As I mentioned earlier in the video, I have a Patreon if you would like to be a part of the community to help this channel become primarily community funded. Please check it out. I'll leave a link in the description. There's some cool perks. It's popping off on the Discord. I'm beyond thrilled, excited, terrified about how this has all happened. I didn't expect this at all, but it's been amazing to see this community grow so quickly, and I'm so grateful to all of you. But also, if you like this video and you can't support on Patreon, then please let me know how you thought about it in the comments. I always love reading everyone's thoughts. I feel like I'm so lucky to have such an incredible comment section on every single video that I put out. It feels like I would love to know people's thoughts about this. It is something that I am so fascinated by as someone who doesn't want kids, but has a lot of friends who are making that decision quite actively at the moment. And if you want to keep up with what I'm doing, I've got a link to I got a little Substack newsletter that you can subscribe to for free. I've got my social media, so you can find me all over the internet. And until I see you next time, bye.